Hello everyone, today we're going to look at the game which how Hans Niemann ended to be the winner of Title Tuesday. So let's go. We're looking from Alireza side. Actually we can flip the board and watch from Hans Niemann because he won the tournament and he faces the King's Indian attack. So he just plays the same setup actually, except with the bishop on the e7 square instead of on g7. They both develop the knights and the pawn break. This is the important pawn break in the King's Indian attack and defense. Hans just takes it, the exchange that opens up his queen, and now he places e-pawn move, so he opens up his bishop and he creates balance in the center, so they both have now one center pawn in the center. This always closes up this pawn in the future, so the bishop will do not that much. c6 good move, stopping the knight from coming forward, and now he just develops his bishop. And after the queen moves, the knight reroutes because he thinks maybe I want to play f6, defend my center. This knight wasn't really doing anything here because this pawn is just well defended, also with the rook coming. So I want to put it to the other side. And Firouzja thinks the same, he just wants to put pressure on this pawn. But the knight already was there. Now he was threatening to take the pawn because the knight was pinned. So the queen gets out of the pin and the knight reroutes to the center, looking for the f5 square and the d5 square. Now the knight comes, stopping the knight from going to the d5 square, but it still goes to the d5 square, and he just has to passively defend his pawn. At this point you know you're just worse, because your rook is passive, your queen is kind of blocked in, and your opponent has such a strong knight. But that doesn't stop Hans from playing the game, of course. Bishop develops, and here he just reroutes the knight back, taking space on the queen side and replacing the knight with a pawn. After h5 he takes the knight with the bishop, and after takes he puts his knight back to b8. He undevelops the knight, and after this pawn he just ignores it. He says, take it, you just helped me because you're opening my bishop. And after takes he doesn't take with the c pawn, because then the pawn would hang from the rook, so that wasn't a smart choice. But now that means this rook will be passive and this rook will be very active. But the bishop just drops back for some c-pawn move and the rook opens up. He just develops the bishop, putting extra protection to the center, ready to reroute the knight. And c4, taking space away. And now the queen comes with a pin to this queen on the knight, putting some pressure, maybe with f5, maybe with the knight coming around. So he's starting to build up an attack. The bishop thinks it will do more on this diagonal than it will on this one. Now Hans brings in a knight, very logical move if you ask me. The computer thinks a move like g5 would be better to really prepare this f move, but just an okay move. The knight comes, as we see, already has 48 seconds more than Alireza, so that's a good sign. But Alireza finds the great move. The knight comes back, so maybe you want to play f4 yourself. And this knight is also looking at these nice squares and blocking the queen. And now queen takes, bishop takes. That's also a reason why the bishop should be on that square, and this bishop also moves back. So now he has these two bishops, he has the bishop pair, and they both just stand on his side of the board, but controlling a lot of squares and defending a lot of things. So here he goes for this aggressive move g5, and Alireza plays a brilliant move. He sacks the knight for a pawn, because then he will the knight back, so he has won a pawn. But actually not, because if you take my rook now, I will have 2 pieces for the rook, which is good for me. So you take the knight, and then I just drop back, and now I've also won a pawn. The bishop drops back, looking at these weak squares. The knight finally develops again, gets pinned. The rook defends the knight. Now the other bishop comes out, pinning this pawn to the rook. So maybe f4 ideas. And now the knight reroutes. His idea was to bring it close to the king, and maybe look at this, defend the pawn. And now the king just moves up, and it is a misser because the computer thinks that rook d to c1 much better is. No, rook d to c1 much better is. I cannot really explain why, but after something like a rook move, you have this infiltration. You're just putting a lot of pressure. But that's not what he played. He played the move knight back, the king moves up, and there comes the knight to help defend. The rook comes, the king comes, the rook goes to the second rank. It's not really attacking anything because the bishop is defending it. Now this really nice square for the bishop, just in the way of all the pieces, almost trapping his rook. It's a real pain in the ass. But he decides to reroute it outward, and now he attacks the pawn, but the rook cannot double, so this rook defends, and g5, trying to clamp down on these squares, putting more pressure. No, the rook drops back to defend the pawn, so the bishop can move. And now nice move h4 and h6 check. So this is now passed pawn, so the king kind of has to stay in his box, otherwise it will promote. Now the knight reroutes again. The bishop drops back, and the knight wants to go to this square, so it gets taken because it would be a very strong knight on that square. And now the rook moves up, and a brilliant move. He sacrifices the rook, so now he has this check, and he takes this pawn. So he gets a bishop and a pawn for the rook, but now he has this really nice pawns in front of the king, so there will be a lot of checkmating ideas. Also, it's just almost promoting, but Alireza fights back and finds this idea of, it's a really nice idea because you have 2 pawns in a way, so you can capture, but after this and take, these pawns are gone, so you can manipulate the pawn to win this one. And in this position, it's not 2 protected passes anymore, it's just 1. And the king comes to take it, but you attack the rook, and you just invest in this pawn. And after this move, he blunders, because find the winning move, it's not that hard, it's just bringing your king, because there's nothing that will stop the pawn. The right idea was to just move the king closer, so after this, your king, this doesn't work, but there you have rook e8 behind the pawn. So after you push it, you can play this move, king f3, winning the pawn, because the pawn is hanging and you can push it. So that's why that was the right idea. So thank you all for watching, check out my other videos, and I hope you all liked the video.